Welcome to Story Time. I'm Kimberlyn, and Story Time is really meant as just an opportunity to connect. Now, in these modern days, in these modern ways, sometimes connection happens in real time. And what a gift that is to share space, to touch, and even feel one another's energy. But given our technology and our life's challenges, sometimes synchronous connection is not always possible, and is even sometimes not always ideal. So story time is that asynchronous opportunity with a synchronous invitation to be here with me live and in person virtually, to share our stories, to share our energy, to share the journey of becoming our best selves through yoga living, through inspired living. Inspired living is really just the practices of intention, attention, and action to do the yoga living of breathing, moving, and resting. I'm exploring the kind of krama progression of the seasons from the Ayurvedic perspective, from winter to spring and to summer. But in that krama progression, I'm looking for tangible evidence of what I call the let it be of winter, that introspection, that quiet reflection, that exploration of our intentions, to kind of the buzziness, the messiness of spring that invites us to let go. But without a strong foundation, without the letting it be, it can be hard to let it go. Our breathing, the just breathing practice, or just breathe practice, this month we're exploring some of the breath techniques, the pranayams that help us to recalibrate our willingness and our dexterity in letting go. Not just letting go of the breath, but letting go of our expectations and letting go of our attachments. And there's plenty of philosophies within the yoga tradition on letting go, and we'll talk about those as they relate to inspired yoga living in Coach's Chat. But in story time, I often reflect on personal experiences, stories of my living, and how those stories bring to light my understanding of this yoga journey of let it be, let it go, ultimately looking to cultivate the let it flow, the prana circulation of receiving and giving, inhaling and exhaling. And I wanted to share a little bit about gardening. And by gardening, it might mean tending your lawn. Gardening might mean having a potted plant that you nurture inside within a controlled environment. Gardening is the process of facilitating attention, effort, and care and observation to the well-being of a plant, right? But we can use this analogy to also refer to our relationships with other people. For me, the analogy goes deep in the sense that we can plant our seeds and till the soil and harvest, reap the fruit of our labors until eventually the decomposition. But in terms of gardening itself, COVID has awakened a new level of gardening for me. In fact, it was a direct outpouring of our isolation time in 2020 that I took to building. And by that, I mean the hardscape of my garden. Nearly 1,000 bricks were delivered to my house, in case I extended and rebuilt a number of gardens and even built new gardens to plant bulbs, to plant immediate annuals to bring in color. And so now, 2 years later, the fruits of my labor are budding forth. I have iris and daffodils and crocus. And now, for the first time, blooming, I have tulips in my yard. And my son has done the diligence of maintaining the grass and the trimming, the edging, so much so I had to actually interrupt his habit of weekly mowing when November came along. He wanted to continue to mow, probably because he liked to continue to make the income that we pay him to maintain the gardens. But the labor of building and stacking and flattening the earth or shifting the growth that was already there to then build something new is not foreign to me. I love the idea of creating something from nothing. And yet we don't, right? There is never a nothing from which we create. We simply gather the resources that are available, the soil, the sun, the rain, the water, the bricks, the grass, the energy that moves through me, the tools that allow me to cut into the soil, to break up the grass as I replace the grass with garden soil. My eldest child chose to build a garden too during the COVID period. And her efforts to build a garden were much more in the idea of producing food, growing cauliflower and zucchini and peas and pumpkins, I believe. There were strawberries and raspberries as well. But unfortunately, what came as a result of her emphasis on the planting and the nurturing of the live plant itself was undermined twofold. One, when we finally were able to take a visit to visit my parents after the year and a half of COVID shutdown and isolation, that in that season away, the plants suffered. But upon our return from that week's visit and trip across country, my daughter went into a bit of a seasonal depression, which was a little exacerbated by the regrowth of COVID infections and some other complications as well. I mean, depression is not new to my family, not new to my experience. And yet, in hindsight, I would like to have been more encouraging, more supporting both of her in that season and supporting her endeavors in the garden. To water her plants, I believe now would have also watered her spirit. That watching the plants wither and having withered from our time away was a bit like the overwhelm that she often feels and then shuts down and backs out. So why am I sharing this story? Because we can't undo what's done, but we can redo and begin again. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when I put plants in the soil, they come up in areas that either got moved or relocated by the local wildlife or by the flow of water or even by my own unawareness, meaning maybe I grabbed the wrong bulb. I grabbed the tulip bulb rather than the daffodil bulb and couldn't tell the difference in its infant state. The point being is that I can rearrange things, especially when we're working with bulbs and rhizomes like iris and tulips and daffodils and crocus. My favorite way to gift myself in the spring is by planting those bulbs and then allowing them their time to just be in the ground. And then as spring returns, to break free from the soil. And from the first little snippets of green leaf that shoots up, I'm delighted, I'm enthralled, I'm captured by their journey to grow tall and strong, to open, to bloom, and to flower forth. Now, who's to say if those off seasons when the bulbs and the rhizomes don't bloom, if that's not their own season of depression. And in the right timing, that introspection and that quiet reflection can be healthy and important. But depression is when it lingers beyond its value, when it lingers past the point of nurturing and restoring and starts to become a burden to our returning, to our blooming. So yeah, some of my blooms, some of my flowers did not bloom this year. Some of them attempted to bloom and then a late snow destroyed them, canceled out their blooms, and even caused their tender leaves to freeze and then rot, expediting them right over the vitality of spring and the beauty of summer or the full bloom, and moving right into the decomposition. For me, the cycle, and especially the effort involved in gardening, and then pausing to celebrate and recognize the passive witnessing that comes from that labor, sometimes even years later, is why I continue to return to the practice of gardening. In visualizations, in the earth itself, and getting my feet and my hands in the soil, but also to use the analogy when I come to a challenging experience in my life. What seeds do I need to plant? What values do I want to cultivate? Where is there experience that it's time to let go and allow it to decompose in order to become the fertilizer for my next stage of growing and blooming and becoming? This analogy is one that nurtures me in my own self-care. And I rely on it deeply when extending that awareness and attention to the care of others. Do I always get it perfect? No. Sometimes I plant seeds in places that don't have the soil's nutrients necessary, or the wrong amount of sunshine, or perhaps even the wrong season, right? Planting spring bulbs in the fall, vice versa. The intention of being in connection with the earth is what brings me back. And letting go of my ideas and expectations, one, that food will come to the table. I have now relinquished that component of my gardening to be a matter of feeding the local wildlife. But once in a while, having a raspberry or a green bean that can make part of our meal is the abundance that is above and beyond the labor of love that goes into the practice of gardening. And for me, is the gift that is given back to remind me why I do my practice. Any of my practices, my breathing, my moving, my gardening, my journaling, my praying. And sometimes it looks like napping or crying. Spring can be messy, as can fall for that matter, as we transition between kind of the extremes of winter and summer. Not only messy in the outdoors, but messy in our head and our hearts, messy in our relationships. Spring, yes, often noted as being the beginnings of summer love, right? That spring is in the air, love is in the air idea. And yet, when we embrace love in any and all of its forms, there's also something that we're letting go of. And so cherishing that letting go in order to receive and embrace what's next is part of the full circle, the cycle of living. And the pause to notice and to cultivate gratitude in those transitions is what helps me face each transition and let go of the beauty It's contained within the dying bulb, the dying bloom, as it loses its petals and withers and returns once again to the soil beneath. Where are you at in your gardening? Regardless of whether you have the soil to plant seeds in, you are the seed. You have everything you need to bloom forth. And sometimes it's a matter of adjusting the chemistry or the exposure, finding some support, right? Peas love a trellis to climb. What is it that you need to welcome into the garden that is your own blooming forth? Ask for help. Build the retaining wall, not to close out, but to support and to strengthen what's within. Thanks for being here and allowing me to share this metaphor of gardening and this practice of building the gardens of our lives so that we can truly bloom and beautify just by the nature of our showing up and being our authentic selves. May you be well. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And in that service, may we rekindle our own sense of well-being, connection, and gratitude. Namaste.